The views expressed in this podcast are the view of the authors and do not reflect the official policy or position of the USU, DoD, or U.S. government.
Welcome to the Prospective Doctor Podcast, brought to you by Med School Coach. Pre-med and medical students alike are encouraged to tune in each week for tips on how to become a strong med school candidate, gain acceptance into the school of your dreams, and succeed on your journey toward residency and becoming a doctor.
Hello, everyone. I'm super excited today for our special guest, Dr. Mandy Cuda. And I'm just going to have her tell us a little bit about herself.
Thanks, Rosita. It's great to be here with you on your podcast. I am a family physician, and I know you obviously because we work together on a regular basis in telemedicine. But my history is that I am a military physician. I was trained at the Uniformed Services University and then went and did residency at Tripler Army Medical Center and spent actually 16 years on active duty. And now I am in the reserves and work at the Uniformed Services University in my reserve work, teaching students and actually doing a bit of recruiting. So I thought that might be a good connection with your podcast here.
That's awesome. And I'm sure we'll dive deeply into that. But let's start back in the beginning and let the audience know what drove you to family medicine.
Well, I actually went into medicine, obviously as a military physician, wanting to kind of do it all. So I thought maybe I would do general surgery. And interestingly, I didn't really enjoy the OR. That actually ended up being my sort of decision point. It maybe was just because as a student, you don't get to do a lot. So maybe I didn't give it as much of a chance as I should have. But once I tried out family medicine and I got to do the procedures and see all the variety of patients, and then realize in the military how much family physicians have the opportunity to do, family medicine became an easy choice for me. And I actually figured that out pretty early on and was, pretty much straight into family medicine, all the way through to when I got selected for residency.
That's awesome. And I think that's an important part to bring up, where you may believe that you may have an interest in one field. And of course, you can still have an interest in it and explore it during your medical school journey, but it may not be something that you actually like or think that you can do for the next 30 years. So it's okay to have an open mind and explore the other rotations.
Absolutely. And I often will tell students that it's sometimes not even about what you think it's about. So like for me, it was just really about the environment of the operating room, whatever that was. I found it sort of boring. And that was an important factor in terms of, choosing a surgical specialty. But the generalist mentality, I actually see as shared across general surgery and family medicine. Often, we lump together the primary care specialties, but I do think that those generalist kind of mindsets are interesting to consider as you're going into your specialty choice.
Absolutely. And I just find it interesting, the different ways and pathways that people enter medical school and things like that. So you mentioned that you trained through the military. How was it different to train in the military than civilian residency?
Well, if you're talking about residency, I would say that I had probably one of the best experiences in the military that you can have, training out in Hawaii. I have to say that was a great place to train. When you're when you enter into medical school, with the military. So I went to the actual military medical school, but there's also the option to go to the Health Professions Scholarship Program, or HPSP. You can be in all of the services. So Army, Navy, Air Force, or Public Health Service. And because I was in the Army, I had, kind of these different options for where to train, but not as many options as I would have if I had been in the civilian match. And so what actually determined that was my significant other. And then eventually, we eventually got married. He's a fellow grad from the Uniformed Services University, and he was going to train in urology. And so we had to find a spot to match together. So, in answer to your question, that's a little bit of history as well as in answering your question. The military residency experience is obviously taking care of people who are in the military. So the population is very focused. Out in Hawaii, I had the opportunity to also take care of veterans because the Veterans Hospital and the military hospital was combined in that particular location. So that was really a great experience. That doesn't happen in every environment. Obviously, veteran hospitals are not always co-located. And obviously, I wore my uniform to work a lot, but then I would change into scrubs, just like probably all of us spent a lot of our time in residency in. And really from there, the residency experience is pretty similar to what most civilian folks would experience. I would say my medical school curricula was probably the most different because we had a lot more military exposure, history, officership, that type of thing. And in residency, we did have some of that coursework that was kind of interwoven into the curriculum. We did some military unique curriculum and different sorts of experiences. And our faculty tended to be pretty young because the way the military works is they would bring in someone into a residency, they'd only stay for 3 or 4 years because they would rotate and then take another job that the Army asked them to do. So that actually was really energizing typically. So I felt like all of our residency faculty were pretty close to us, in terms of experience and offered really good perspectives. So those are maybe just a couple of differences in the military versus the civilian residency.
That's really interesting. And it brings up some other questions in terms of people who may be thinking about potentially doing military medicine or obtaining the scholarship. There are students who can enter from a civilian medical school versus going to the Uniformed Services University of Health Sciences. You mentioned that there were some differences in the curriculum in terms of military training. Are there any other differences, or do you think that if someone is very sure that they want to pursue military medicine, that it would benefit them to undergo the medical school training there?
So this is a question that I get asked a lot when I'm out doing kind of different recruitment trips at health fairs. And I would answer that as a hearty yes. So if you're really convinced that you want to do military medicine, Uniformed Services University is an amazing experience. I mean, when I went and actually visited the school, the community that's there, the interesting aspects of the curriculum that are, some military unique, but also very centered around public health and, just preventive medicine. There's a lot of things in the military that no matter what type of specialty you go into, you need to understand, concepts of public health and preventive care. So the orientation of the school was very much, what I wanted to experience. The difference in the payback, so that's usually where people are the most curious, is only 3 years. So when I went to USU, I had a 7-year commitment after I finished my residency. So I did my 4 years at USU, I did my 3 years of residency, and then I had my 7-year commitment. I actually ended up doing a fellowship, so I had 2 more years tacked on to that, but that was a choice that I had made. For someone who does the health professions scholarship program and say goes to a civilian medical school, 4 years of medical school, say 3 years of residency, they just have a 4-year obligation to pay back. So it's really only a 3-year difference, which I know sounds like a lot when you're heading into it, but as you know, 3 years goes by really fast. And the debt question, so the USU, the military medical school, not only are you paid the stipend and, all of the school paid for and the whole thing, you're actually paid a salary as a student. So I was actually, kind of in an active duty status as a student. And so I was paid as a second lieutenant. So it's sort of like you're getting paid to go to school. So there's this, concept that, again, if you're really committed to the military, the financial benefits are certainly, there to choose USU over HPSP. Now, you still have to get into USU, just like you have to get into any other medical school. So the application process is through AMCAS and, it's the same sort of steps. So there are some people who get into civilian medical schools and actually don't get into USU. So then that sometimes decides it for folks. But if you have the option to do one or the other, to me, it feels like an easy answer to go for USU.
That seems awesome. And it seems like there are a lot of benefits there where, of course, there's the scholarship. And for the listeners out there who may be very early in their stages of their medical journey, where they may not have looked at the expenses, physicians, and in their medical education, I think on average, it's above $200,000 for most people when they leave with their medical school loan burden, and for others more. So it may be a viable option. One question I have for you in terms, I guess two questions. Do most people who consider using this option typically have an ROTC background or something like that that would make them more competitive in terms of getting acceptance into the school?
Yeah, we have about 50% of our students that matriculate that have some sort of prior service. So that might be that they had an ROTC scholarship in school. They might be coming out of the military academies like West Point or the Naval Academy or the Air Force Academy, or they may have had a completely different career in the military and they're actually switching over and now going to medical school. So we have kind of the wide range of people who have experienced the military coming into USU. That said, I am an example of somebody who came in with absolutely no military experience and received my direct commission when I was accepted to USU and offered the Army position there. So it's not 100% that you have to have had that experience. You certainly have to have the commitment to the military. The story that I love to tell, and this might be helpful for your listeners, is I interviewed my first year for medical school and had a whole bunch of, experiences at other medical schools. That's where I found USU. And I didn't get in the first year. I got waitlisted at USU. And then, my second time around, I said, I really want to go to this school. I only actually applied to USU and the state school where I was living at the time to be close to my family if I had gotten in, but I was so determined to go to USU at that point. And then I got accepted that second time around. And I was actually able to go back and review my sort of application, notes. And the concern that they had the first time around was that I just wasn't quite committed to this military, sort of experience. And I was able to kind of go out and get a little bit more experience, meet some more military physicians. And so was able to kind of speak to that my second time around. So that's one of those things that I would say for anybody who doesn't have a military background would be to make some of those connections. Maybe it's with the military physician. If folks live near a military treatment facility or military hospital, getting, even some shadowing experience if the hospital allows that. Obviously COVID, there may be some, restrictions right now, but any opportunity to build those connections with military medicine is helpful to provide a little bit of that additional background.
I think that is really amazing that you gave some really key points in terms of resilience and taking a step back. Like, don't give up if you don't get in the first time, because a lot of students don't. So it's okay to take a step back and figure out how you can add to your application in order to be a better candidate. Also figuring out where the gaps are and how to network and meet other people in order to engage with them and show that you are committed. And then you brought up something else in terms of commitment, in terms of military service. I think that is one thing that a lot of people need to think about before they engage in the commitment, because like you said, you had a 7-year commitment. Other students have 3 or 4, depending on when they enter. It is very important because a lot of times with something such as this, it's very difficult to back out. So
Totally.
Making sure that you're ready for this type of commitment is something that you shouldn't take lightly.
I agree with you. No, I have definitely had conversations with students where I have said, this might not be the path for you, and that's okay. I mean, I think it's a wonderful opportunity, and option that, because sometimes for folks, it may be even a medical condition or, other types of things that might actually mean that they can't enter into the military. They, have an actual physical restriction from, being able to do the things that are required of them to be an officer. And in those situations, it's not impossible to find other ways to support the financial sort of situation of medical school, as you've described. And I know you did a federally qualified clinic and, there's all sorts of situations where folks can, sort of pull down that debt load, which I think is, again, it's a really compelling argument to consider the military, the financial aspects of it. But again, you don't want to just do it just for the finances because there are other options out there. But if the military is something that folks are interested in, it really is a very it's a very financially sound decision for sure. And I will say that I've met, more of my closest friends and obviously my husband, in my military experience that, it's just a community of people that really have a set of shared values that I think are really key, especially when you're practicing medicine and building out resilience, as you mentioned, as you kind of live through the military life together. Because there's so many things that kind of come at you that may or may not be expected. And that happens in medicine too. So you put the kind of military experience and then medicine. The resilience piece of this is something that I could not have built alone. It was really the friendships, my husband and colleagues along the way that really supported that.
Absolutely. One of my favorite mentors in medical school actually gave me that advice, not necessarily about the military, but what you're talking about in the sense of community is kind of like finding your people.
Yes.
So finding your people, whether or not it's through military service and all of the connections that you make, you're going to figure out ways and in the commonalities through the shared experience that you have. And from there, you're going to also kind of build up skills. Like we all are going to gain skills as you train to become a physician in terms of leadership. You're going to be leading teams, whether or not it's administratively or leading the team of nurses or teaching other medical students or residents. You're going to learn skills about communication and writing and things like that. But you'll also gain additional skills with all the things that you train in the military. So it's more about like finding out what you want to do and how you want to grow yourself.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And, who you want to have challenging you in that space as well. And that's where, again, that those finding your people. And I think that applies to the specialty choice too. That's a quote that I often find myself saying that, when you're rotating on the different clerkships, you're going to eventually find your people. And again, I get at sort of this kind of shared values, shared experience. And so there's a lot of ways that applies, whether it's where you're choosing to go to medical school, the path of military or not, and then of course your specialty choice.
Absolutely.
At Med School Coach, we know that getting into medical school is hard. In fact, 60% of pre-meds who apply to medical school don't even get accepted. And if you want to get accepted into a top medical school, it's even harder. It's a complicated process, and even students with great grades and MCAT scores get left out. That's why more students than ever are turning to Med School Coach for admissions advising. Our advisors are all physicians and former admissions committee members, so they know exactly what medical schools are looking for. One-on-one admissions advising from Med School Coach makes all the difference. Our expert team will help you develop a game plan, prepare your application, edit your essays, and coach you for interviews. Every pre-med has a story, and we'll help you tell it so you can stand out from the crowd. Visit us online at medschoolcoach.com and use offer code PODCAST10 to save 10% up to $400 on a Med School Coach admissions advising package. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and Med School Coach can help.
Now, the military is not really well known for having a lot of lady leaders. Can you tell us if there was any notable difference in being an Army physician and a woman?
It's a great question. And again, one that I get to talk to students about quite a bit. And actually residents and, I've done, some different teaching roles along the way. So I would say that the military has been developing, and it's, sort of having lady leaders. I like how you put that, where we have certainly a lot more now than we have in the past. And it's always that question of whether or not it's the military in and of itself that is sort of restricting women. And I don't feel like that was ever the case. I was invited, pretty early on. I mean, way before Women in Combat, which was even after I deployed, some of those transitions, they were looking for women physicians, to be officers and things. So that was something that they actually wanted. So I think it has more to do with kind of the lifestyle that you find in the military, where there's certainly, as we were describing, some of the experiences that you're asked to do along the way. So I went to USU in 1999, and 9/11 happened while I was a third year medical student. And so entering into medical school, I kind of had this mindset of kind of a humanitarian military, like that was kind of what I was expecting to do once I graduated. And then when I left medical school, I mean, we were already, in Afghanistan, heading into Iraq. And by the time I graduated residency, my cohort and I were all among the folks that surged and deployed to Iraq and Afghanistan for pretty long deployments. And obviously that has been an experience that folks have shared, almost ever since. So those types of transitions in life work better for some people than others. And I won't even say that that's a gender sort of determination. The seasonal component of the question, though, does play a part here. So one of the things that for my husband and I, we had decided to wait to have kids, for example, because we're both residents. And again, this is just the choice that we made. I know lots of people who have kids in medical school and residency, and it works. And this was, again, just the choice that we decided to make. So by the time we were finishing I was finishing residency, it was also a time where maybe I was going to be getting deployed. And so it's like, when do you have a baby? Because as the person actually carrying the baby, I couldn't be deployed and pregnant. So it was sort of timing and figuring that all out. And I will say that for me as a woman, I felt very well supported by my colleagues and those sorts of things. The policies of, maternity leave have evolved and improved in the time since I was in the military. So that's a really positive thing for women. Maternity leave used to be only about 6 weeks, and now it's, 3 months, which is pretty consistent with most professional environments that folks might find themselves in. So those things are evolving in the right direction in the military. There's some element of the actual experience of the practice in a military combat environment that's pretty unique as a woman. I think that, it's unique for everybody who ever deploys, because unless you're coming into this having been an infantry soldier, and maybe this is sort of a life that you're used to, everybody goes through a transition when you're deploying for the first time. It's just such a different life. And practicing as a physician and as a woman, I was as far forward where I was deployed as I could have been as a woman, and was the only female officer, the only, certainly the only female doctor anywhere nearby. And that actually ended up providing some interesting, because we were in Afghanistan, opportunities actually. So I had more opportunities to work with local nationals, especially women, than my male counterparts might have. And so I always sort of looked at it as, how is this an advantage that I'm a woman? And there were times when folks would, sort of say like, oh, we're a little bit more worried about you being out and about, working with, the patients or that sort of thing because you're a woman. And I said, well, I'll do what I need to do. And I just tried to stay flexible. And that's kind of my mindset approach to it. So anyway, those are just a couple of examples. I'm happy to talk more about any of those, but there's lots of ways that the gender question kind of interacts with the military.
No, you brought up some really good points. And I actually was taking notes on about 3 of them that I want to just highlight for the students. I think you brought up a great point about being flexible and willing to adapt and having to have to adapt when you said when you entered medical school, you were having more desires to do humanitarian efforts. And then with the terrorist attack, you had to transition to being a physician in the military during a time of war. So that just shows like having an open mind, and things can change rapidly. You also mentioned the thought process that a lot of female physicians in general have to think about, and even males, because everybody is involved in family planning. Yes. But like deciding when to have your children and things like that is a very hot topic for the listeners out there. Maybe a month or so ago, if you listen back on if you're a subscriber, you may have heard Dr. Kamaria Caton Bott talk about, who's a reproductive endocrinologist, talk about the decision making and how people enter medicine kind of after college or after having another career, and you may be graduating in your late 20s, early 30s, sometimes 40s, and may not be focused on having a family at that point because you're in such a intense time frame. But when is the right time frame? And if you're not ready, considering things like freezing your eggs or just having the child now, there's no right time. So thinking about your family planning and what your goals are important. And then the other thing you brought up was utilizing your uniqueness. Like you were the only woman in a certain area during that time. So you were able to kind of leverage that and use it to your advantage and help serve people.
Yeah. No, I appreciate all that reflection. I definitely have found more opportunity that being a woman has been an advantage for me, over time, and have grown to embrace that more and more. And I did appreciate the podcast where you had that opportunity to talk about the family planning, because I think it's really an important thing to think about. And like you said, I did not enter into medical school like, okay, this is when I'm going to have, when I'm going to get married, and this is when I'm going to have kids. Like that wasn't my mindset. I was like, this is what I'm going to do as a physician, and this is the residency that I'm going to do, and this is this. And so it's just helpful to even plant that seed so that folks can be aware of the, sort of parallel experiences that you can have.
Absolutely. So that brings me to my next question. So it's kind of like a nice setup where there is a large push for things where some people like to call work-life balance. How would you encourage students to start that early, especially when they have such rigid timeframes planned out for them in terms of their testing schedule and things like that?
Well, you know that this is one of my favorite subjects to talk about. And I think it's because I have always been someone who has reflected on my experience over time. And so as a result, I've been able to sort of engage with my work and life. And I like integration. Again, there's lots of different terminology, but I think over time, what I found is the path to realizing when, oh my goodness, I'm like working way too much right now, and I've reached my capacity. I'm not living out the values that I want, maybe as a mom or as a wife or as a friend or sister or, daughter, those sorts of things. So shifting, making some choices around how that shifts. And the key discipline that I believe has helped me with finding that path, and what I suggest, and just had the opportunity to talk with the Society of Teachers of Family Medicine about this kind of idea as well, is paying attention through reflection. So that is a practice that no matter where you are in your journey, that you just start paying attention to yourself. And obviously mindfulness and other practices are ways that people can kind of start to, hear about this in a way. My practice has been through journaling or using, some sort of regular, planner. There's lots of ways that you can do it. And I actually really love the kind of tactile, I know you share this with me, the tactile, like writing things down, because then I can go back and look at it. I can kind of think about it, and I start to see and feel themes in my life. And what I have actually found as a theme is that mentorship and growth and cultivation are things that I really get jazzed about. And honestly, if I had never even gone to medical school, those would have still been the gifts and strengths that I would have brought to any job that I had had. So that's some of the power of reflecting in terms of what work and life looks like over time. Because then if things don't go exactly the way that I expect, I can kind of see that there's a thread that actually pulls me through this that's bigger than maybe my circumstances, or whether or not I got into medical school, or whether or not I get this certain job or promotion or whatever it is. And I found that living that out has really brought about my work-life integration, because those are the things that are consistent in the fact that as a mom, I cultivate the growth of my kids. I love to garden. So that theme flows through that as well. So those are the types of things for me that is what work-life integration means. And reflection through writing and journaling are kind of some of the key practices that I've at least applied.
I love that. I don't think I have anything to add to it. I will say that I'm a strong proponent of journaling, and Mandy and I have a little debate over which type of journal to use, but there's no need to get into that. We'll just say, look into them, compare, try a few out, and see if it works for you. And if that doesn't work for you, try some other things. You have time, and reflection is definitely important, whether or not it's reflecting on your future, your career choices, your family choices, or how to integrate that with other passions in your life. Because in actuality, being a physician, just from my perspective, is just a component of who you are, and it doesn't necessarily define who you are. So it's important to kind of explore other aspects of yourself.
Absolutely.
Yes.
At Med School Coach, we know that studying for the MCAT exam can be challenging, especially for busy students on the go. That's why our team created MCAT Prep, the only all-encompassing study app built specifically for the MCAT. MCAT Prep by Med School Coach provides student access to extremely high-quality content and a personalized curriculum for free. The app has more than 250 videos, 1,000 flashcards, and 1,000 unique MCAT questions. Plus, MCAT Prep by Med School Coach allows students to create a personalized study schedule and track progress over time. You need every competitive advantage you can get to get into medical school, and now you can put the experts from Med School Coach into your pocket. It's the closest pre-med students can come to a personal tutor without spending a penny. Download MCAT Prep by Med School Coach for free at medschoolcoach.com/MCAT. Or download it directly from the Apple Store or Google Play Store. You can achieve your medical school dreams, and MCAT Prep by Med School Coach can help.
And my final question for you, since you've given us so many different pearls of wisdom, is what piece of advice do you have for both pre-meds and medical students as they enter the realm of medicine?
So for pre-med students, I guess that message of flexibility would be the thing that I would say pretty loud and clear. And you said it really well earlier. The path to going to medical school looks so different for so many people. And getting in the first time around is actually really rare. So use every year, even if you don't get in the first time, to do something different. There's lots of options out there now. I always suggest, I had a scribe work with me who, ended up going to medical school and actually doing an HPSP scholarship. And I believe that scribing is actually one of the best ways to actually train to be a doctor, even before you go to medical school. Like, I know the folks that are scribes learn so much about EMRs and, how to ask questions and all of those things. Plus you can get direct mentorship from a physician. So that's just one job that's, sort of a great opportunity to have that exposure, but just stay flexible. Look at every year that maybe you get into medical school. Obviously celebrate that. But if you don't get into medical school the first time or even the second time around, just use every year to, build out your interests. And you might find that medical school actually isn't the path through those additional years. I've had more than a few friends who have actually gotten into medical school, gotten a little ways into it, and were like, wait a second, this is not the path that I wanted.
Mm-hmm.
So they were flexible to choose to get out and do something different. I think that would actually be a carryover message for medical students also, is to just continue to pay attention to what is, driving you, and not always, the voices that speak to us are obviously usually people that really care about us. But as we move more and more into our professional environments, that maybe becomes less, possible to always assume that every single person that's asking you to do something is doing it out of your best interest. And so, and people aren't like out to purposefully, hurt you or anything like that, but we're all just trying to get jobs done, right? In work and life. And sometimes people will say, oh, Urquita, you should totally go do this one thing because you'd be amazing at it. And that's my opinion. You have to decide from all of those voices what you need to listen to and who you need to listen to. So I think that would be maybe the piece of advice that I would offer. And maybe as a reflection, the reason why I say that is because for myself, I've always been someone who has wanted to listen to people who are around me. I think that makes me a pretty good collaborator. Urquita can confirm or deny that as my teammate.
I can definitely confirm that.
But it also has a flip side to that, where if I'm listening to so many people, sometimes that my own voice gets a little bit tamped down as a result. And so then I am not always sure about what my way ahead looks like. So you could call that people pleasing. You could call that, all sorts of things that I've had at risk of in my own life. But I think it's certainly something to be aware of, who you listen to and the path that you follow.
I love that you brought that up, because it all comes down to reflection and introspection. And it sounds weird for me to say this coming from a podcast geared towards pre-meds and med students, but what I usually tell my students who I mentor one-on-one or who come saying that they have an interest in medicine is, if there is absolutely anything that you can think about that you want to do besides medicine, try that first. And then if you still want to be a doctor, then be a doctor, because it's very cliche and everyone knows, like in your personal statements, don't just say, I want to help people. Of course we do. We all do. But there are many different ways to help people, whether or not it's through being a scribe, like you said, or a medical assistant or a nurse or a social worker, or helping people through philanthropy or anything. You can find different ways to engage people and help them. And if you want to do that in the health realm, there are lots of different ways to do that as well. So medicine is a very intense environment, and the journey is very long. You'll be training 11 plus years. So you have to be sure that this is something that you want to commit to, and that it also fits you and your personality and your needs and your wants and your future, because there's a lot more than the shiny anatomy classes and things like that. It's a lifelong commitment. So definitely take a step back and think about if this is right for you. It's okay if it's not. You can utilize your things that you've learned on this journey and figure out ways to pivot. But if it is, there are resources out there, and there is ways to enhance your application if you don't get in the first or the second time, and just figuring out ways to utilize your resources is very important.
It's so true. And I think that message is true for all of us once we get into medicine too. And I know I've heard you say that a couple times on your previous podcasts as well, where if the path that you're on, I think that's sort of the story of even what happened to me in my military experience. The path sort of worked until it didn't. And then I had the opportunity to change my path. And so I did. And even entering into our experience of telemedicine, I know you and I share that, that was a risk to kind of change and do that too. So there's always a different path, whether it's within medicine or outside of medicine. And how many people who are physicians have this, physician career and then go on to actually have a second career doing something completely different too. So I think it's, there's kind of that, all of these flip sides to looking at it. Really, the bottom line is that most of us are graced with a very long life and a long career. And, I hope that for everyone that you're listening to, that they are, have that opportunity to have many experiences in their careers and just really enjoy each step of the way.
Thank you so much. And with that, I'll give you an opportunity to tell everyone goodbye. You've told us so many wonderful pearls of wisdom, and hopefully we can have you come back and talk more about like work-life balance or something if you're open to it. But I'll give you an opportunity to say goodbye to the listeners.
Well, Urquita, thanks so much for having me. And to all the listeners out there, I just want to say that you all have a gift in Urquita being your podcast host. And I wish you all the best and just am inspired to be here.
Oh, thank you so much. And for all the listeners out there, be sure to click that subscribe button. If you have any questions or you have any recommendations for other potential guests or topics that you would like for us to reach out to or talk about, you can message me on Instagram at Dr. written out DOCTORD, the letter Graham, or reach out to Med School Coach's Instagram as well and let us know. We're starting to incorporate some listener letters or requests. And I'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Each episode of the Prospective Doctor podcast is brought to you by Med School Coach. To access articles, videos, webinars, and free tools to help you succeed on your journey toward med school and beyond, visit our website, prospectivedoctor.com. We hope you tune in again next time.